again, thank you for being here. I get the privilege to introduce Andy. I've known Andy. It's kind of one of those scary things when you start thinking back that like 20 years now. That's like, wow, how did that happen? But I'm thankful for Andy, and we knew each other a while ago while we were both served at Baptist Bible College, now Clark Summit University. But then I graduated and went out to pastor, and he, by God's grace, amazing, had a vision for reaching and really being a missionary to college students and a ministry where he said, I have a vision of how I want to impact the world for Jesus Christ. And he now has a ministry called Addison's Walk, and he is a missionary to college students on a secular campus. He'll tell you more about that, and as we were talking, he said, that's really my mission, is to minister to college students in a secular environment, be a missionary to them. And if you know anything about the academic world in our culture, not just ours, it needs Jesus. And Andy is shining a light of Jesus into that world, and I'm thankful for that. He would say this: he wants to encourage believers and challenge skeptics. And so if you're a believer here today, I trust you're going to be encouraged. If you're a skeptic and you're here today, listen to what he has to say. And I'm sure he would talk, or many of us would talk to you about Christ today. But he has always been an encourager to me that makes me think deeply about the truth. And we think differently about things. And I appreciate that about a brother that will cause me to get outside of my normal way of thinking. Not a bad way, but just my normal way, and help me understand things better. And so, would you welcome Andy Giesman this morning? Thank you, Andy.
Can you hear me okay? All right, great. It is good to be with you this morning in sunny Flint, Michigan. I mean, where else would I want to spend my time, this spring than Flint? So it's great to be here with you. I'm looking forward to sharing with you. Thank you, Shane, for that wonderful introduction. Yes, I have a ministry in Scranton, Pennsylvania. So those of you who are fans of The Office, yes, that's Scranton. I can answer all of your questions. I live 4 blocks from Cooper Seafood House. And if you ever want to come and visit there, make sure you have an updated tetanus shot. That's probably a good thing. But we started thinking years ago. I pastored in the inner city, a sister church of this one, and through a series of events, providential events, I began to ask questions like, why do I believe what I believe? And so after having already graduated from Bible college and seminary, I went back to school in my late 30s to study philosophy because I had nothing better to do. And I wanted to start asking the hard questions, and I've had several times where I've told the story, and people will come up to me and say, well, you studied philosophy, and your faith didn't blow up? Like, you didn't run away from Jesus? No, because I found out that the things that I believe, there's actually really good reasons to believe them. It makes sense. This abject nonsense that Christianity is crazy, that it's just something that you just believe without having to know anything, is the stupidest thing I've ever heard of in my life. It actually makes sense. I mean, if Jesus is the Logos, what word do we get from Logos? Logic. It makes sense. So it strengthened my faith, and then we started thinking, wow, I got an opportunity to teach as an adjunct professor in one of our local schools, and I live 15 minutes from Clark Summit University, not that one, another one in the city limits, and I suddenly realized, wow, this is an unreached people group. There's no Christian organizations on any of these campuses. There's 5 of them in the city limits of Scranton. So I started complaining to God about that. I said, God, there's 10,000 college students here, and they need Jesus. Do something about it. And you can imagine how this conversation went. So God responded with, hey, dummy, why don't you do something about it? Because I think you have 20 plus years of youth ministry experience, degrees in Bible, theology, philosophy, and you live 4 blocks from the University of Scranton. Oh, yeah, right. I guess I could do that. He's like, yeah, okay. So we launched this thing in 2008. My In with College Students is in the classroom. And I'm having the time of my life. And if you want to ask me questions about what it's like to teach and what is, for all intents and purposes, a secular environment, I will tell you. If you're wondering, is it really that crazy? Yes. I will tell you that now. But as we get into our text this morning, if you have a Bible, please turn with me to the book of Daniel. We're going to be spending some time, at least in the first 2 sessions in Daniel. I'm toying with switching things up for the third and final session. It will still be within the theme that we are talking about here. But I have really come to enjoy the book of Daniel, particularly the bits that we tend to skip over or we use for things that we don't really think are all that important. And as we get into this, I want to share with you a recent piece of biblical archaeology that I have recently come across. So some of you may have an apologetic study Bible or an archaeology study Bible. I've actually seen those. This is so new, you're not going to find it in there, okay? And through my own sources, this has come to me, and I want to read it to you. It is an ancient letter dated April 2nd, 605 BC. Here's what it says, translated from Aramaic. The great king, Nebuchadnezzar, may Marduk protect him, in the office of vassal state admissions, wish to extend to you, Daniel, a formal invitation to be part of the class of 602 BC at the University of Babylon. Okay, I made this up. But it's cool. Just give it a minute. I am delighted to offer my sincere congratulations for such an esteemed honor. As you are well aware, the University of Babylon, King's College, is the most prestigious institution of higher education on the planet. You will be learning alongside other young men of your age in the most technologically advanced city the world has ever seen. We are holding a spot for you in the Hammurabi School of Mesopotamian Religion and Wizardry. That's my favorite part, by the way. Many of our graduates are given the honor of serving His Majesty at the conclusion of their 3-year accelerated program. You will soon be receiving a cuneiform tablet via Empire Express, which will give details for welcome weekend. You should plan to arrive at the Ishtar Gate. Sincerely, Ashpenaz, Dean of Students. P.S. I shouldn't be telling you this, but you might want to check with Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They might have received similar letters. So, I love the book of Daniel, particularly the first 2 chapters, because I don't know if you realize this, but it is one of 2 classic university texts in the Bible. Now, I took a class in seminary on sermon stretching, and I aced it, so just bear with me. Clearly, there is no such thing as the University of Babylon. Well, there is now, but there wasn't in 605 BC. And if you're wondering, the other classic text, university text, is Acts 17, Paul at the University of Athens in the Areopagus, right? So I love this stuff, and I love this narrative in Daniel because I've come to think about it from an angle that perhaps you haven't thought of before. You see, Daniel, often when we talk about Daniel in our theologically conservative churches that are represented here today, we either look at Daniel as one of the go-to places to study eschatology or end-time events, and it is, particularly beginning in the second half of chapter 2 with Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the great man, right? And that is an appropriate thing to do. Or we treat Daniel as just mere VBS Sunday school material because it's cute, right? And, because think about it, this whole university thing, you have 4 boys forced to enroll at the University of Babylon. There's a meal plan. There's ID cards. Ashpenaz is like the dean of students. You'll meet Arioch, who's like the head of campus security in chapter 2. In fact, you're going to read about the first college prayer meeting in chapter 2 today. We're going to get there. But other than that, we kind of make Daniel cute, like for VBS. All you need is a sandbox and some kittens, and you can throw a kid in there. Oh, look, you're in the lion's den. Right? Or we tend to mythologize the stories of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and we don't even know their Hebrew names, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Daniel, we seem to remember because he calls himself Daniel throughout most of the book. And to the point where with good intentions, we take a kind of a Sunday school view. And when I say that, I mean, please don't misunderstand. I think Sunday school is important. I think VBS is important. But you understand what I'm saying. Oversimplifying, mythologizing, not acting like these events actually took place in space and time. And they did. And then sometimes, I'm sure I've said it, you've probably said it, and I would be shocked if no one in the room has not had it said to you. Someone at some point or another has said to you, and trying to encourage you from a good place in their heart, has said the words, "Dare to be a Daniel." Do you realize what a serious challenge that is? That is a life or death challenge. But if we're merely mythologizing the stories of Daniel, and we hear something like "dare to be a Daniel," we tend to think, well, okay, if I'm going to be a Daniel or a Hananiah, a Mishael, or an Azariah, if I want to follow in any of their examples, that means I'm going to maintain a private faith in a hostile environment. I can do that. Well, you know what? You can. And I'm going to tell you this morning, big deal. You can maintain a private faith in anything as long as you keep your mouth shut. So is this like Lions territory? Are you guys like Lions fans? Yeah, woot, right? Okay, so this illustration hits different depending on where I'm speaking in the country. So I've been to Wisconsin several times. They're serious about their football out there. I mean, honestly. It's kind of crazy, right? And if you mention something, I think I kind of like the Vikings instead, oh boy, watch out, right? So if you're actually so, goofy to be a Vikings fan in Cheesehead territory, or like a Dolphins fan in Buffalo, New York, or whatever, you want to be a fan of those things, or, a Yankees fan and you live in Boston, you pick your poison. Just keep your mouth shut, right? And you can maintain your faith in whatever thing you want. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? The thing about Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, their story is not amazing because they managed to keep their mouths shut for their 3-year accelerated program that they were there, beginning in 605 BC as 15-year-olds. The amazing thing about these boys is that they maintained a high-profile public witness for God in a hostile environment. Let me say that again. They maintained a high-profile public witness for God in a hostile environment. In other words, they took their own lives in their hands multiple times to stand for something beyond, outside, and greater than them. The only way you can do that is if you are convinced it is true. Raw passion, feeling good about it, having some kind of personal inner conviction only that's not attached to reality will not get you all that far. You might be able to tenaciously cling to what you believe for a while, but you will fail. Unless you stop and ask, is it true? So, what we're going to do, at least in 2 sessions, maybe 3, I'm going to be praying about it in between. We'll see where this goes. There are worldview questions that are embedded in the first chapter and first half of chapter 2 of Daniel that these boys had to deal with it, and they are implicit. You won't find them written out. I want to point them out to you, and by the way, I'm not using PowerPoint because it feels naughty. I don't have to, right? So this is just raw and questions you have. Hopefully we'll have some time for some Q&A at the end, and if you need help with anything, you let me know, and I will certainly help you out. But let me give you the questions that these boys had to deal with. There's a few of them. And when I say fundamental worldview questions, I mean those ideas that every person on the planet has to deal with, fundamentally, under which are nested all other questions. So in my philosophy class, my intro to philosophy class, I actually teach a segment on worldview to my students, and I teach them there are 9 fundamental worldview questions that everybody has to answer. Now, you can add them up in different ways. It's not necessarily 9. In fact, I've seen it reduced to like 4, and that's okay. But I like the 9 that I use because they are comprehensive. And under those questions, you have everything else. Everything follows from those things. So there's a few that are here. The first one is this. who or what is behind human history? Now, if I were to ask you gentlemen the answer to that question, what would be your answer? God, right? So if I say who or what is behind human history, you could sing it out like an unholy choir. Beautiful, right? So you would answer God. If I were to ask you, are there any other options? What would you say? Yes, there are. I'm not saying I think they're right, but of course there are options. And you need to know what they are. So we're going to be looking at who or what is behind human history. We're going to be looking at what is really real. And then if we have time, if I don't take this in another direction, we're going to be asking the question, do you have access to the supernatural? So I want to draw your attention to Daniel chapter 1, verse 1. And here's what it is written. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. Now, right there in verse 1, chapter 1, verse 1, there's a lot of information packed in there, and this is usually the thing we kind of skip over because we want to get to the important bits of the meal plan and the ID cards, and then we want to get on to the prophecy in chapter 2. So let's just kind of get through the preliminaries. Like nobody cares about Paul introducing himself in any of his letters. You should. So right here in this first verse, we are learning that Daniel's telling us history, right? So there's 2 different ways of teaching history, and he's going to do both. One is just telling us history, and that's telling us what happened, but he's also going to give us theological history and tell us why it happened. So in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. Verse 2, and the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. History or theological history? Theological history. Why is that? Because he's telling us what happened. Now, if you stop and think about the dynamics of Babylon and Jerusalem, it's almost ridiculous that Daniel has to add that clause in the beginning of verse 2. Okay? It's not surprising at all that a power like Babylon is going to lay siege to Jerusalem and it's going to overpower it. Babylon is the biggest, baddest group of people on the planet when this is written. Jerusalem, for all that we know and understand that it is really kind of a backwater as compared to Babylon. All right, it would be like as if, pick your favorite small little town anywhere in Michigan, right? And if the powers of Detroit decided to come and lay siege to your little town, well, you may put up a good fight, but it's just a matter of time, right? So it's interesting that Daniel says, all right, I want to tell you, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, Nebuchadnezzar came and laid siege to Jerusalem. And in verse 2, the Lord delivered Jehoiakim into his hand. Because he's telling us who or what is behind human history. In this case, Yahweh, the Lord. And then I want you to look at one more thing, and we're not going to be going verse by verse much more. Along with some of the articles, you might have a translation that says vessels or cups, right? Along with some of the articles from the temple of God, that is Nebuchadnezzar, carried off to the temple of his God and Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God. You're going to find out that those vessels are going to represent the downfall of an empire. Cups. What is really real, as we will be looking at in our second section. So these boys are 15 years old. They have arrived in Babylon. And how does this happen? I'm going to give you a little bit of a history of Babylon, because it's not like Babylon just popped up one day and said, hey, we're really tough, let's start knocking over our neighbors. They've been around for a long time. Nebuchadnezzar is out on campaign in 605 BC. This is well documented on tablets and on cylinders that have survived very nicely outside of the biblical record. This is good because it's verifying what we're reading here in Scripture. This is a good thing. And so in 605 BC, young Nebuchadnezzar is out on campaign. He is mopping up the last of the Egyptian-Assyrian alliance. This is the thing that, and do you know where that battle took place? The Valley of Megiddo. Many battles have been fought there, and those are not the last. So he's on campaign, and he finds out that his father has passed away. And so now Nebuchadnezzar is the king of kings of the Babylonian Empire. He does what all despots do in these times. He goes to his vassal states. One of them is Jerusalem. You can read about Jerusalem's the southern kingdom's alliance with Egypt against Babylon in places like Jeremiah. God, through the prophet Jeremiah, says, you knuckleheads, you're actually making an alliance with the Egyptians? Hello? Ask me for help. So you can go read about that. It all falls apart. So all of these city-states that are trying to maintain their independence are now under the Babylonian Empire. They're the vassal states. And so Nebuchadnezzar goes to the vassal states, and he knocks on the door, and he says, I'm here to take tributes with me back to Babylon, which includes the most good-looking, smart, advanced young men of every city, including Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And they are not the only four. This is a practice that was carried well into the Middle Ages. When you are laying siege to a city, you take tributes back to your city because it keeps the people you want under control. When your sons are being held in another castle, you tend to behave yourselves. This is why they did it. So here you have these 15-year-old boys that are taking basically 1,000 miles from modern-day Jerusalem to modern-day Baghdad, Iraq, and they are enrolled in a school and they are learning. And we'll talk about later today what they are learning, because if you say, Andy, do you know? Well, actually, yes, because I'm such a nerd, I wanted to find out, so I chased it down. Hashtag philosopher props. These are the things that we do. So here they are. There's no youth pastor looking over their shoulder. There's no parents to call if they act up in class. They're in the most technologically advanced city on the planet that is completely, absolutely, very, very religious. These are not atheists. It is pagan. And so the level of paganism that they come into, surely they've had contact in a declining southern kingdom that's had its own problems, hence the reason Jerusalem is going to be destroyed not too long after this in 586 BC. But they have never seen anything like this before, and their world is turned upside down. And it all begins with a narrative that many of you know. If we were to continue reading down through the verses of chapter 1, we would find out that the king wants them to eat certain things from his table. We're not told why they refuse to eat it. The most likely understanding is that probably it is food that has been sacrificed to idols. That's the most likely understanding. Or it violates Jewish dietary laws. So, they're like, here, eat the bacon cheeseburger. Well, no, that's two dietary laws. I can't do that. But whatever. And as you know the story, they refused, they said, just give us, salad for 10 days. So they're in the salad shooter diet for 10 days, and they came back looking better than anybody else, and so they gained favor in the eyes of Nebuchadnezzar. The first time they had a public witness for God in a hostile environment, right? The first time. How could they do that? Because if they just got to Babylon and they just kind of looked around them and they said, well, this is what happens. This is what happens. Because can you imagine, just stop and think with me for a minute, is Babylon already in 605 BC an ancient city? It is. It's been around for many, many generations. In fact, we could go all the way back to about 1800 BC, so 1200 years before Daniel and his friends arrive. Babylon is an important big deal, and founded by a guy whose name many of you know, Hammurabi. After that, the city exchanged hands multiple times. So Hammurabi and named it Babylon after the Akkadian gates of the gods, and then came the Hittites and the Assyrians and the Kassites, and you have guys like Sennacherib of the Assyrians who are known as the most brutal people on the planet. And finally, you get up to Nebuchadnezzar and his father, Nabopolassar, and he sacks Nineveh, he dies, his father dies, and now here he is, and so it's one more despot ruling the city. Couldn't these boys make a logical, sensical decision to say, we are just one more piece in a machine that's never going to stop? Why would we risk our lives for something that we were taught in our Jewish version of Sunday school? Okay, they didn't have Sunday school, but you understand what I'm saying. Our Jewish version of Sunday school were young men, and for all we know, they were turned into eunuchs, so literally, what do they have to lose? Give me the bacon cheeseburger. Give me the good booze that's being offered to Ishtar or Marduk or Nebu. Drink up me hearties, yo-ho. What is to stop us? Because I asked and was answered, who or what is behind human history? And you said, God. And I asked you, and it was a bit of a trick, I'm sorry. I asked you if there are any other options, and I understand why you would say no. I do understand that. But to be intellectually honest, we have to say, no, there are other options. Do you think where I teach at the University of Scranton, do you think the only option that is the foundation of what they're doing for an educational system says, yes, God, and God alone is behind human history? Well, not the farthest, because it is a Roman Catholic school. So there are some who think that, but for some it is very far, because there are other options. I want to share with you 3 of the options this morning. So these would be names that would be unknown, of course, to Daniel and their friends, but the worldviews that they represent are really nothing new. And you need to know these 3 names and these 3 views as we think about what our potential views of human history are. Now, the 3 names I'm going to share with you, so if you're taking notes, I highly encourage you to write the names down and write down a few of these terms and ideas. And if any of them are new or super foreign to you, please put your hand up and I will come back and answer that question. And then I'm going to give these to you, and I want to show you how they all can't be right. Right? So here's the good thing. So I asked you, who or what is behind human history? God. Good answer. Are there other options? Yes. But there's this little thing that's a great friend to Christians. It's called the laws of logic. And one of the laws of logic is called the law of non-contradiction. That means something cannot both be and not be at the same time and in the same way. Now, I'm going to be a little persnickety about something right now. No, the laws of logic are not a human construct. That's not true, because if you actually want to try to argue they don't exist, do you know what you have to use? The laws of logic. It's kind of brilliant. It's like trying to use math to explain away math. It can't be done, right? And if you say, well, math, it just doesn't make sense because it doesn't add up. Do you see what you just did there? Right? So you can't, math was not created. It was discovered, right? Logic, it's the same way, and I wish I had time to explain it to you. But this is why if someone says, I believe in God, and someone over here says, I do not believe in God, to be intellectually honest, you need to understand that both of those positions are logically viable, meaning they can be argued because it is an objective truth claim. Listen to me, something that is objectively true is either true or false, but cannot be both. You're tracking with me. This is beautiful. So I tell my students this on the first day. I wish you could see the first day. It's great. The moment I tell them, oh yeah, I pastored an inner city Baptist church here in town, I'm like, oh no, he's going to beat Jesus into us with a 40-pound reference Bible. It's great. I love the looks on their faces. But I tell them, look, I clearly believe in God. That's kind of like, you got to start there if you're going to be a Christian. You kind of have to do that. And you may not. And I tell them, look, I'm not going to make you believe something you don't want to believe, because that's not fair for my position, and I will get fired. That's a whole philosophy I have. We can talk about that later. So I say, you have, as a human being, the basic human freedom of belief, just like you. Do you guys understand that? Belief is a basic human freedom. Every person on the planet is a believer. Now, I didn't say every person on the planet is a Christian. Every person on the planet believes. And if you say, I don't believe, that's still a belief. You just stated it negatively. Okay? It's still a belief. Right? So I tell them, you have the right to believe whatever you want. You can see some of my students like, yeah, Christian, I'm going to take you down. I say, okay, you have the right to believe there is no God. I have the right to believe there is a God. But here's the thing, we both can't be right. And ideas have consequences. Beliefs have consequences. So this is why you never have to walk away from a conversation saying, well, what's true for you is not necessarily true for me. In fact, never say that, because that's not true. True is true, whether you know it or believe it. 2 + 2 is 4, even if you cannot count past 1. Yes?
I just want to reach an understanding, so make sure I'm interpreting what you're saying correctly.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about, so one person says they believe in God, one person says they don't believe in God. Will they both be right? Are they talking about the same God?
They both can't be right.
So are they talking about the same God?
Sure. But they both can't be right, because God either exists or he doesn't.
I'm not trying to be a headache.
No. So he either exists or he doesn't. So I am either Andy Giesman or I am not. Right? So it's an objective truth claim. So I'm not saying you should just arbitrarily choose one or the other. I'm saying, to be intellectually honest, either God exists or he does not. I mean, I've staked my whole life that he does. And I make arguments that he does. But to be intellectually honest, I have to know that there are people on the other side of that argument who can make a logical argument. If I just dismiss it and say, that's stupid, that's not a gospel witness. So this is where we employ things like 2 Corinthians 10. We tear down the strongholds that set themselves up against the knowledge of God, taking every thought captive. The theme of this conference is true. It is a war. The battlefield is the mind, and the weapons are our ideas. So when it comes then to who or what is behind human history, it's not quite so binary, right? So when we say either there is or there is not a God, it's one or the other. It's binary. It's one of two. But with human history, we have some choices. So I want to give you 3 names. They all come from the 19th century. You've heard these names before, but you may not realize what an influence they have had on our world. And the same kind of ideas would have been available in the ancient world in 605 BC. Any of them, these boys could have said, that's probably what it is. Pass the booze, give me the burger. First worldview, that of Charles Darwin, Uncle Chuck. So Charles Darwin is one of our favorite whipping boys in our circles. Why? Why? Evolution. Right? Now, don't pluck the chickens and heat the tar quite yet. But what if I were to tell you that evolution really isn't the problem? Now, I'm not an evolutionist. I have theological, historical, and philosophical reasons why I'm not. Why I'm not an evolutionist. However, I understand that evolution is a thing, at least microevolution. I adapt. Do you adapt? How many breeds of dog did Noah have on the ark? 1, all right? So that's, does a Chihuahua and a Great Dane both possess the essence of a dog? Yes. Okay, well, how did that happen? Microevolution, right? That's not a big deal. So that's not talking about going from kind to kind. That's within kind. It's fine. And again, in an attempt to be intellectually honest, this is a thought experiment I'm going to ask you to participate with me on. Could God have used an evolutionary process if he wanted to unfold creation? The answer is yes. He certainly could have. It's not the problem. We go right to this symptom, but we forget about what is underneath it. So for Darwin, Darwinian evolution, or as he tries to explain, the origin of the species, which he never gives an explanation for origin, he only gives an explanation for complexity in living things, but that whole theory is dependent and necessary on one thing being true. That at the bottom of it all, there is no God directing anything. That the universe is simply a series of biomechanical mechanisms that are just cogs in the wheel that keep on turning. There is no meaning, there is no purpose, there is no reason to anything. In fact, in Darwin's world, and actually to try to assign meaning to anything in life is actually the word is gratuitous. If you've ever worked in a restaurant, you know what the word gratuity means. It literally means assigned value, which is kind of like, again, hashtag philosopher props. When I'm in a restaurant, you know, with a big party, and you get the check, and you're like, we have charged you for the gratuity. Wait, you've charged me what I want to say the value is? Again, hashtag philosopher props. I get what it is, but that's literally what a gratuitous tip is, right? You are assigning your own value. So if Darwin is right, why would these boys stop and actually risk their lives, although even everything has been taken for them, but now they're risking the only thing they have left is their lives for Yahweh if there's no meaning? Because what would give the Judeo way of life any meaning any more than the Babylonian polytheistic way of living? None. If Darwin is right, you just get to pick one. And if you're thinking, Andy, this is nuts, this is an ancient, at least 19th century worldview that has nothing to do with us today, I would say to you, what shows and movies have you watched recently? This worldview is everywhere. Let me give you a few examples of things that I've seen recently. I and my kids we've kind of enjoyed the reboot of the whole Godzilla idea that started back around 2016, 2015. We had Kong Skull Island, we had Godzilla, King of Monsters, and then that horrible Kong versus Godzilla. It was bad, but, you know, I had to finish the whole series. The whole thing is centered on this biomechanical determinism that says it is only the machinations of nature that mean anything, and it does not have any value for life at all. If you don't believe me, watch what is, I believe, the second installment of those movies, and one of the main characters, who's actually a person who finds these giant mutant monsters that are living dormantly, like underground, and she's trying to set them free, and she gives this whole speech about how we are the virus, and that it's nature and nature alone that can run everything. That's Darwin. And I'm telling you, in the name of Jesus, gentlemen, if that's right, all of this is a joke. And we're really kind of stupid for giving up a Saturday to be here to listen to a nerd like me. We could be out doing something fun instead. Are you with me? Ideas have consequences. And furthermore, not only would their risking their lives make any sense, but why else would other things make sense? There's another book that I have read. It was turned into a movie. It was called The Martian. Anybody ever read the book or see the movie? Oh, by the way, I need to give you a disclaimer. All day, I'm going to be talking about books and movies and stuff. It doesn't mean I necessarily endorse them, okay? So yes, I know they have naughty words in them, so let's just be grown-ups and move on. Is that okay? Can we do that? Okay, good. So, because in the book The Martian, like every other page is like, it's pretty rough. They toned it down for the movie. But it's about a character played by Matt Damon in the movie. He's part of a manned mission to Mars. They have to get off the planet, lickety-split, because a storm is coming, going to destroy everything. And he gets lost in this sandstorm, and they think he's dead. Well, lo and behold, he's alive. And then the whole book and the whole movie is all about the entire world coming together, spending billions of dollars to rescue one man. Why? If Darwin's right, that is the stupidest idea ever. Survival of the fittest. Hey, bro, if you don't make it, sorry, Darwin Award, Jungle Book, War for the Planet of the Apes, on and on and on and on. It is Darwin's idea that gives credence to the books that you read, like Brave New World, Aldous Huxley, 1930s. If Darwin is right, and it's just nothing more than a biomechanical determinism, what do you do with machines that keep breaking over and over and over again? Throw them out. You don't keep fixing them. Or, if you get to something like Brave New World, Aldous Huxley, you recycle them. So, Uncle Chuck. Second guy, Friedrich Nietzsche. Now, Nietzsche is, again, one of our favorite whipping boys because he famously said, God is dead. But many of us don't know the context in which he was saying that or even where he said that. Well, the truth is in a couple different places. And the context is he was speaking to basically what was Christian Europe in the second half of the 19th century. And he's saying, hey, Christian Europe, you claim to be Christians. I don't see it. Because you say one thing and you do another. And so the idea of God is where it should have always been, dead and buried. But what Nietzsche wanted to do is he said, because there is no God, something has to fill that void. And for Nietzsche, the void was power, raw power. Power, he said, is dynamic. It doesn't need to be attached to anything. And in Nietzsche's day, you can read this in books like Beyond Good and Evil or on the genealogy of the morals. And what Nietzsche wanted to do is he wanted to divorce the idea of good from God. In the 19th century, that would have been unthinkable. Hold on. In the 19th century, that would have been unthinkable. Today, it's normal. I'll give you a case in point. Star Wars. Any fanboys in the room? Okay. Who are the good guys? Who are the good guys in Star Wars? That's not the Jedi. They're like the galactic, referees. It's the rebellion, right? Why are they good? They're fighting oppression, but when they're in charge, why wouldn't they be oppressive? What's to stop them? See, we are led to believe very, very well that the rebellion are the good guys. I dare you, I'm not going to give it away, I dare you to do a little bit of research and find out who did George Lucas base the rebellion on. Look it up. So you can go look that up. But I ask you, why are they good? If you don't like that, how about the Avengers? What makes Captain America and Tony Stark morally better than Thanos? Nothing. Nothing. It's all about who has the power. And if I were to ask you, like I asked you, who or what is behind human history, if I ask you, where does good come from, probably your answer would be, well, it comes from God. You're right, that's an incomplete answer because I've said, well, what does that mean? And if you were to say, well, God tells us what's good, well, that's partially true, but goodness exists because it is part of God. Otherwise, if God doesn't exist, goodness is just something we have made up. And it has no more meaning than anything else. So, what Nietzsche was proposing in the 19th century as radical ideas is now commonplace. Third one. So, these boys could have looked at their lives and said, well, it's just power. The third one would come from Comrade Marx, Karl Marx, also a 19th century thinker. He said human history was nothing but class struggle. And there is a definitive Marx connection with Star Wars. And I will leave it at that. You can look it up if you're that interested. Or you can hound me at my table. I'll be happy to nerd talk to you about it. So Karl Marx said, no, history is nothing but class struggle. There is no redemptive story arc. It's not going anywhere. It's just the oppressed constantly being oppressed, and they have to stand up to the man. And so it is part of our own zeitgeist or our own worldview, without even thinking about it, that it's always good to stick it to the man. No, it's not. Sometimes the man is good. And there's order. Read your Bibles. So we get this view that it's a constant class struggle, and Marx is very clear the only way that it's going to be resolved, and it's never completely resolved, is for the lower classes to rise up and, if necessary, violently overthrow whomever is in charge every time, simply because they are in charge. Being in charge does not make it wrong. There is an order in Christianity. There's an order in our Bible. It is a God-given order that is part of his character. This doesn't make any sense. And of the three, the one that has infiltrated the church the most is the third one. Marxism is everywhere. Some of us have been warning churches for years about this, and no one was listening. And then 3 years ago, at the beginning of lockdown, something happened, and it blew it up, and it all came to the surface, and churches were left standing, oh, what is happening? And I know of churches who had pastors that stood up in front of their congregations and said things like, the church is the most segregated institution on the planet, or telling people that you are necessarily racist because of your skin color. How terrible. Let me tell you what's wrong with that. First of all, I have read there's therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. I mean, if you're a racist, get over it. But you are not a racist because you are white. Because I've also read in Acts 17 that it is God who has chosen the times and places for all men to live, so that some will seek him and find him. So that we will seek him and find him. There is no redemption in Marx. You cannot be forgiven for being white or male or heterosexual or a father or married or having a job. You cannot be redeemed. There is no redemption. I'm completely out of time. I'd love to explain more to you why this is a problem, but these are just three. Well, is there any relationship, if we wanted to do one of those Venn diagrams, is there any relationship with the four ideas that we talked about regarding human history? Yes, actually there is. But at the core, all of them can't be right. So is God behind human history? Is it just about a machine? Is it about power? Or is it about oppression? Well, of the four of them, only one gives hope to humanity. Only one. And these boys understood, even at a young age, by living lives where they're risking their lives in a hostile environment, they understand that because God is the author of human history, that their stories mean something. That it actually matters. If Yahweh is the author of human history, then that necessarily means he is the author of the entire universe. That question actually comes first. And so if that's the case, then he is the one who has written this history. He didn't just give the universe a good spin and say, hey, y'all are on your own. Because Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah know some things, that the God of the universe has revealed things to them. Do you guys understand that you wouldn't even know what the universe is if God hadn't told us? The universe doesn't reach out its hand and say, hi, I'm Gary. It doesn't tell you who it is. I would imagine the universe would have a name other than Gary. Sorry for all the Garys in the room. But God has revealed, and so these boys say, it has been revealed to us through the nation Israel, through the prophets, through nature itself, or as the medieval scholars would talk about, the two-book view. We can see God in creation. The heavens declare the glory of God. And we can see it because God has directly given us information we couldn't figure out on our own through our prophets, Through our own history, he has led us. This is the God who has been giving us history. We knew this was going to happen. Daniel knows that this event, being in Babylon, was going to happen. So they stood and say, we will stand for Yahweh even if it costs us our lives. Gentlemen, I beg you, in the name of Jesus in the 21st century, we need men who understand that the great virtue of Christianity is not nice. Niceness is not a Christian virtue. Kindness is, but we need men who are willing to say, I will stand even if it costs me everything. Why? Because there's an author beyond you that has written your story. And it ends well. It ends well.